Hello again, everyone. It is your host, Madam Hellfire, and we have one hell of a topic to cover today, one you may have seen me reacting to in some of my more recent streams. I happened upon this subject December of last year and decided after seeing Wendigoon's video of it that I wanted to cover it myself. Though he did a very good job covering what was out at the time, the series had not yet completed until February of 2022, and therefore his video was incomplete. I was so enthralled by what I saw in this video, I wanted to talk about it myself. In this two-part video series, I'm going to give you my concise timeline of events of Season 1 and Season 2 of the Monument Mythos video series by Mr. Manticore, aka Alex Casanas. Before I get into the timeline of events, I would like to give a few shoutouts and trigger warnings. Firstly, I must give a massive amount of thanks to those from the Monument Mythos community that popped into my research streams and helped me make sense of these magnificent videos as I viewed them live. I want to give an extra special shout out to Kobayashi-san, who gave me an archive of Alex Casanas' Q&As along with helping me flesh out the timeline of events and proofreading my scripts for these videos. I want to give a trigger warning to those with sensitivities to flashing lights and loud noises, as there will be some parts of these videos that will cause you discomfort. Lastly, I would like to address a few things that I'm sure are going to come up with those who are very big fans of this series. I will probably be off on some dates in this series for a multitude of reasons. There are some events that aren't exactly clear on which reality these events take place in, so I may mix some things up regarding that. I will also be taking a few liberties with certain events, as some dates are not concretely given for them. I will also not be covering any of the events in the Nixonverse or any subsequent series that is on the Mr. Manticore channel, as they are not technically attached directly to the Monument Mythos, though I do plan to react to those on live streams at some point in the future. There are several basic premises that I have to explain before I move forward, because otherwise you're not going to understand anything that I'm saying. In this series, there is a middle universe called Wonderland that exists infinitely between realities. Within Wonderland, there are trees imbued with paranormal or supernatural powers that pop up within the different realities of this sort of multiverse. I will be calling these special trees for the remainder of my coverage of this series. Special trees from the majority of this timeline are known to be harmed by a special type of fulgurite created when the Starry Sphinx constellation forms and a special type of lightning strikes the Earth. This material, often called Giza glass, takes the appearance of obsidian and forms in long, multi-layered sheets that can be broken up and formed into weaponry. Lastly, I want to establish how I'm differentiating which reality each event takes place in, as, like I said earlier, there is some sort of multiverse at play. Any event in the alternate version of our reality will be colored in blue. Any event that takes place in the Monument Mythos reality will be colored in green, and any event occurring in a reality I can't directly identify will be colored in purple. Cool? Alright, let's get into the Monument Mythos timeline. The earliest events referenced in the Monument Mythos are made by former senior advisor Leonard W. Moreland in the Starry Sphinx video. In ancient Egypt, the pharaohs were aware of the special trees in Giza glass. A special team of workers was appointed by the pharaohs, given drugs of some sort that made them insomniacs with an increased tolerance for muscle fatigue, and were equipped with blades made of Giza glass to slow the growth of these special trees. They would cause these special trees harm with these blades so that the paranormal plants would need to spend their energy on internal repairs instead of growing upwards, and would allow for structures to be built over them. Yes, the Great Pyramids of Giza were the first known containers for the special trees. George Washington is born February 22nd, 1732. During the Revolutionary War on December 25th or 26th, 1776, George Washington, from an undisclosed parallel reality, falls into the Delaware River and is replaced with a body double that eventually carries on as the first president of the United States. In the Monument Mythos reality, the Declaration of Independence is signed and ratified in 1786. Halfway through the Liberty Lurkers video, we are shown a short propaganda piece that depicts George Washington descending into Wonderland. Though I cannot completely confirm this theory, this is what I believe was being conveyed. In the Monument Mythos reality, Washington has completed his terms as president sometime after 1797 and comes across a special tree he wants to cut down. Unbeknownst to him, this tree is of the paranormal variety and sends him into Wonderland. While in Wonderland, Washington attempts to escape and over time is turned into a being later dubbed the Horned Serpent. The first photo of the special trees is taken in 1840 and a poem is later written to describe them. The forest fell swiftly as the lumberjacks swung, except for the special tree which could not be stung. She missed her friends and the hymns they sung, so she started a tune that broke the man's lung. Construction of the Washington Monument begins around the special tree in 1848. In 1858, the architect for the Capitol building, Thomas U. Walter, reaches out to engineer Montgomery Meigs to start the creation of a statue to sit atop the building. Here is as best I can gather the timeline of events for the creation and delivery of this statue, Freedom. Meigs reaches out to sculptor Thomas Crawford to provide design sketches for the statue. 3 sketches were drawn and the third was chosen for sculpture, but a request to change the cap was made. Journal entries for this process from Crawford's daughter, Nina, began around April 5, 1858, with her remarking about how Freedom looked remarkably like her mother, Louisa. Between April 5th and April 10th, Crawford starts to act oddly while sculpting Freedom and begins spending more and more time in his studio. 6 weeks after casting begins, Crawford reaches out to Meigs and lets him know that casting is taking longer than expected before going missing. Meigs attempts to contact Crawford to no avail, and by April 13th, Louisa is worried enough to leave Nina alone in their home to check on him. Louisa returns from Crawford's studio on April 15th, and by the next day, an inspector named Alfonso Safino arrives to ask about the now missing Crawford. I don't know exactly who reached out to the authorities in Livorno, Italy to check on Crawford, but I can only assume it's either Meigs after he got no response or Louisa after she found something terrible in the studio. It's around this time where things really get creepy. While Louisa is being questioned, Nina hears her screaming that the statue has his eyes and runs from the house in fear. Between April 16th and April 18th, Inspector Safino contacts Meigs to notify him that Freedom would arrive in America in a month, along with the fact that, Crawford is dead. On April 18th, Nina runs to the docks and stows away on a ship named Monarca, which she remembered her father stating Freedom would be shipped on to her new home. Per the captain's logs of the Monarca, 6 crates containing different parts of Freedom were loaded onto the ship at dawn. Nina discovers these boxes and hides within them, unable to escape as they are tied down by ropes used to secure the boxes. On April 21st, Nina writes that she hears the loud sound of clay scraping across the floor of the boxes, the ropes tying the boxes down, snapping and allowing her to escape her confines. After going to get food and water, she returns to the boxes to find that Freedom had escaped as well and put itself together. She also remarks that her mother was right. It has her father's eyes. She spends the next 3 days hiding and gathering food before hesitantly returning to the crates, believing that she had nowhere else to hide away from the ship's crewmen. On April 29th, the Monarca makes a stop at a port in Gibraltar to patch some holes in the hull. Nina also makes her last entry on this day. She describes how Freedom takes her from the crates on the boat and onto land while the Monarca is stopped at a port in Gibraltar. Captain's logs from the same day also confirm that the crew found the crates empty and Freedom missing. Freedom takes Nina through the jungles of Gibraltar, cutting down trees until they were suddenly descending into a deep cave. A fire was then started by the sentient statue by hitting its arms against the rock walls of the cave before it proceeds to sharpen the blade it carries for hours. Numerous reports during the day were made to the Gibraltar police force regarding massive disturbances at the Rock of Gibraltar that caused hundreds of trees to be torn down and multiple landslides to occur. One person reporting the incident described it as the work of a gigantic, crazed faller. Commissioner H. Morgan and 13 other officers were dispatched to the rock and found a linear path had been cut up it, with trees being cut precisely and so warm to the touch that several fires needed to be extinguished during the trip upwards. At the very end of the path, a large crevice that went into an offshoot of St. Michael's Cave was found. One of the officers, Officer Hadley, was lowered in, and the concern he showed upon what he found got the whole team to descend into the cave within the next hour. At the bottom, they found Freedom with a hollowed-out torso upon it, along with the splayed remains of an individual flattened like a set of clothes. The remains were cleaned from Freedom and sent to the morgue, while the sentient statue was taken back to the Monarcha to continue its journey to America. In a second investigation into the cave, Nina's journal is found, confirming that Freedom had killed her, skinned her, and tried to wear her skin. Upon Freedom being returned to the ship, a great battle occurs where many of the crewmen are killed in the fight to tie her down. The captain and enough of the crew survive after wounding her to bring her to America. Upon arrival, Freedom had now taken the look of a giant human woman per the writings of Philip Reed. Another battle ensues to take her into custody, the skin of the crew members stripped from her body until only a bronze statue remained. Freedom stands still and is placed upon the top of the Capitol building, Peel writing that he hopes she is only dormant and would rise again to exact her revenge. More of what exactly happened to Crawford and Nina is elaborated upon in an interview given by Louisa.
È andato a Roma quando era un 21enne e ci è rimasto per il resto della sua vita. Era divertito dal fatto che la proprietà degli schiavi americani lo volesse per creare una statua chiamata Libertà. All'inizio Thomas non voleva aiutarli, ma poi realizzò che la statua poteva diventare un simbolo per altre persone. Dietro alla statua un berretto della libertà, qualcosa che gli schiavi romani liberati indossavano. Penso che se una statua alta 6 metri di una donna liberata si ergesse sulla cupola del Campidoglio, alcuni uomini sarebbero stati meno ignoranti. Puoi immaginare quanto deluso fosse quando il signor Davis a Washington gli disse di togliere il cappello dalla libertà. Ma Thomas vedeva che il suo progetto andare a buon fine. Andò persino in Egitto per trovare il materiale per la sua spada. È un vetro molto particolare, il vetro di ghisa. Una volta, mentre stava affinando il vetro nella sua officina, si tagliò accidentalmente la punta di un dito. Nonostante fossi preoccupata quando me lo disse, lui non riusciva a smettere di ridere. Mi disse che il vetro era così tagliente che la punta del suo dito si affettò senza dolore né sangue. Però poteva comunque sentirla. Quando Thomas si concentrava, poteva addirittura farla contrarre sul tavolo. Lo trovava divertente, io no. Ricordo che una sera tornò a casa senza una mano. Diceva che poteva comunque muoverla all'officina. Era così giovane quando se ne andò. Aveva solo 43 anni. Mi sarebbe piaciuto passare più tempo assieme. Ci amavamo davvero tanto. Puoi immaginare la mia sorpresa quando guardai il modello di gesti della bocca. Grazie a Dio che l'ispettore Zaffino era nel torto. Mi fece pensare che c'era un serial killer in città, ma nessuno l'aveva ucciso. Thomas aveva tagliato il suo stesso corpo e si era inserito nella libertà. L'ho visto, ogni parte di lui. Sapevo cosa fosse successo, ma vedere i suoi occhi sulla statua era troppo per me. Lei sembrava viva. Zaffino disse agli americani che Thomas fosse morto. Credo che lui abbia trovato la verità da allora. La polizia di Gibilterra pensava che sarei stata devastata dal sentire che avessero trovato la pelle di Nina nella grotta. Ma ero sollevata, sei ancora viva. Thomas deve averla messa nella statua con lui, dentro la libertà. Thomas e Nina stanno proteggendo l'America, insieme.
On September 25, 1859, construction of the Suez Canal begins. During the time of its construction, the Statue of Progress was commissioned, designed, and constructed under the eye of Frederick Auguste Bartholdi. Between the years of 1861 and 1865, construction of the Washington Monument stops due to the American Civil War. Prisoners of war are led to the monument and sacrificed to the special tree. In both the monument mythos and alternate version of our reality, the Lincoln Monument is built. In the monument mythos reality, however, a tradition called Lincoln Looker begins. The person who describes this tradition best is our good friend Leonard W. Moreland.
There's always someone that we dislike more than everyone else. Not usually famous or important, but they've done something that's affected us personally. Often you're the only person who remembers this act. And I've been that bad, but memory hurts. Everyone experiences this, and the president is no exception. Except he can do something about it. Every president can choose one person to be a Lincoln Looker. After the alibi is fabricated, the person is abducted from their home, and they stay a Lincoln Looker for as long as the president sits in office. Nobody can question his decision, and there's no trial. You might be surprised, but it's nothing new. It's been a tradition. Lincoln Lookers have been around for a very long time.
As a fun little side note, in the monument mythos reality, Abraham Lincoln wears a bowler hat instead of a top hat. On November 17, 1869, construction of the Suez Canal was completed. The developer of the Suez Canal, Ferdinand de Lesseps, records an interview with some very damning comments. The man beneath America ordered me to. Any night, he can sink into my dreams. George Washington slipped into Lesseps' dreams and convinced him to create the Suez Canal. Not long after the Suez Canal completes construction, the Statue of Progress is installed at the entryway in Port Said, Egypt. In the 1870s, Egyptologist Flinders Petrie discovers that the starry Sphinx constellation precedes the electrical phenomena that creates Giza glass. In the 1880s, Petrie secures the location of the newest batch of Giza glass with the help of the British military. The Giza glass was excavated and shattered to make transportation of the material easier. During this excavation, Petrie falls in a shard of Giza glass and is decapitated, but somehow remains alive with his consciousness intact and the ability to mouth rudimentary words. Petrie's head eventually began to discolor and swell, his whereabouts after this incident unclear. In 1884, Frederick Auguste Bartholdi is commissioned once again to design and build the Statue of Liberty for the USA by President Ulysses S. Grant. Construction is completed in 1888. An interview regarding the statue can be found in the video Liberty Lurker. Construction for the Washington Monument is also completed in 1888. A second interview with Frederick Auguste Bartholdi is found within the video Liberty Lurkers and is believed to have been recorded in 1889. There you have it. The horned serpent, the man beneath America, George Washington, was being kept within the base of the Statue of Liberty. It is believed that this occurred through answers given by Alex Casanas after the government had attempted to dispose of or manage the serpent by cutting it into pieces, and that their failure resulted in needing to trap it otherwise. In 1891, the Giza glass from the Petrie expedition, called Petrie's Lot, arrives at the British Museum in the UK. The containers holding the glass were handled so poorly during transit from Egypt that the pieces were shattered into even smaller ones. These shards were considered worthless by museum curators and were handed out to visiting foreign ambassadors as a token of diplomacy. This part of the timeline is an assumption based upon certain statements made in different interviews throughout the Monument Mythos series. On March 4th, 1909, John D. Rockefeller takes office as the 27th President of the United States. When he takes office, he becomes aware of the existence of Giza glass and confiscates all shards from U.S. ambassadors. Unlike others in his administration, Rockefeller disliked the idea of the material being used as weapons and discussed other options of their use with the director of the U.S. Department of Interior, interior. Eventually, the confiscated shards would be polished and turned into blades that were given to a specialized group of abnormally tall Greco-Egyptian swordsmen assigned to guarding restricted areas of the Grand Canyon from trespassers. The specialized team of abnormally tall men were protected under federal law and called the Giza Guardians. All trespassers managed by the Guardians were given a lifetime supply of vinegar to manage the unwanted side effects of the attack. Unfortunately, the benefits of the treatment would lessen over time, and eventually the older victims of the Guardians were given shelter and protection within the Grand Canyon. The only condition of their safety was that they lure known dangerous persons wanted by the federal government to the forbidden zones of the national park to meet their fate at the hands of the Giza Guardians. These unfortunate people would later be called crowns. As with Petri, once someone has their head removed from their body with Giza glass, it will discolor and swell while their body wanders aimlessly in search of it. The heads will float around on their own, but will never be reunited with their body as the effects of vinegar degraded. In 1910, the Washington Monument becomes a major tourist attraction with a particular poster boasting about how you can hear the music within its walls. Directly after the Washington Monument becomes a major tourist attraction, a group of individuals start to disappear from the monument. This group was called the Washington Absentees. During his time as president, somewhere between 1913 and 1917, President Rockefeller begins a secret working relationship with the German military. This relationship begins when Rockefeller is briefed about an overpopulation of crowns in the Grand Canyon, along with the looming threat of economic collapse. With both crises in mind, Rockefeller decides to use the overpopulation of crowns as slave labor.
It had always been my intention to reinvigorate the American economy. Once I had been debriefed of the situation in the Grand Canyon, the overpopulation of crowns, I realized that I was also hearing the beginnings of a solution to the impending economic collapse. That solution being slavery. I can imagine your reluctance to read on, and I entirely understand. Rest assured, I believe that all citizens should be unconditionally promised the very freedoms that our country established at its founding: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. However, crowns are not men or women, nor are they animals. They are merely the decayed shells of ignoble criminals. They do not qualify for the same freedoms exercised by ordinary civilians. Once they were conditioned and bound together, the crowns became the perfect workforce. They did not rebel, for they could not speak. They could not leave, for they were chained. And best of all, the crowns were incapable of forming unions.
He would then sell over 100 enslaved crowns to the Germans and provide some of the best U.S. advisors and engineers.
Germany was the first nation to inquire about the crowns and their potential applications in warfare. I never mentioned the vast quantities of geyser glass we owned, since I knew that it could provide them with many more crowns at low cost. Instead, after signing several agreements and receiving a tremendous German sum, I provided them with over 100 crowns, along with my best advisors and the brightest engineers. Our time with the Germans gave rise to the greatest military vehicles in history, the Rockefellers. Germany's growing demand for men and crowns to construct more Rockefellers revitalized the American economy. Very few nations offered to hire as many of our men and women, and none would have paid as graciously as Germans did. It was, by all accounts, the greatest and most sustainable partnership of recent times.
These crowns would then be used to power their greatest weapons during World War I, airships they dubbed the Rockefellers. Though he acknowledged how magnificent these airships were, President Rockefeller was so ashamed of his name being on them that he requested the Germans remove it from all further iterations. The Germans obliged this request, keeping the name off the airships, but would continue to internally refer to them by that name.
I remember seeing the first German airship in its hangar. I was astounded by its immensity until I saw my own name printed on its side. At that moment, an entirely new feeling unveiled within me. It was an emotion which frequented me in childhood, a blend of revulsion and satisfaction that I followed the execution of a cruel jest on a friend or a stranger, pin in one's foot, a tumble down a stairwell. What would others think? I thought to myself, at the sight of a foreign airship bearing the name of the American president, dropping explosives upon cities of unarmed civilians. I wish to say that revulsion was my sole reaction to this invention, yet I cannot deny that I was proud of this magnificent vehicle. It was perhaps the greatest war machine ever developed by mankind, made possible by yours truly. By nightfall, shame outweighed pride, and I requested the immediate removal of my name from the airship and all its future successors. Although the Germans complied, they continued to refer to their airships as Rockefellers. I knew that removing my name would not obscure the facts for very long. It was inevitable that the American public would one day become aware of my secret dealings in Germany. I could not have foreseen the destruction those airships would eventually inflict to the very nation that provided them. I thought that their creation would unite Germany and America. I could not have predicted that by 1918, Rockefeller bombing raids would have killed thousands of American and European soldiers.
In 1918, at the end of World War I, President Charles Hughes made it his mission to destroy all Rockefellers and seal the involvement of former President Rockefeller.
My terms were over before I could take action against the Germans. It was the administration after my own which was tasked with the seemingly impossible mission of destroying the Rockefellers while preserving the reputation of the former president. Although they knew of my dealings in Germany and had every opportunity to expose me, they chose not to, for in their eyes no good could come of it. However, I knew it was only a matter of time before I would become the laughingstock of my country. As the war drew to a close, I often found myself in a daze, envisioning my assassination on the streets of New York, or, more likely, on the steps of my very own center. However, it would be years before my visions would acquire any plausibility. President Hughes did a fine job of eliminating every Rockefeller while concealing my involvement.
The greatest effort to do so was a mission to take down the greatest version of these war machines, the Luftschiff Rockefeller 70. The L-70 was equipped with 2 gunner gondolas, a stockpile of bombs to drop upon any enemy city or encampment, and was piloted by, you guessed it, a Crown. To destroy the L-70, a task force of soldiers was sent to the top of the Great Pyramid of Giza with a Giza glass-powered anti-airship death ray to destroy it as the war machine flew overhead. While 2 Newport 28 planes distracted the gunner gondolas, the task force used the death ray to destroy the L-70. As soon as the weapon was used, it vaporized and broke the soldiers into microscopic pieces. These pieces were semi-conscious but highly unstable, traversing the desert aimlessly trying to figure out what exactly happened to them. Eventually, these microscopic parts would fuse together into one ultimate being, a soldier with ultimate paranormal powers hell-bent on returning home to exact vengeance on the reason for their creation. John D. Rockefeller commissioned the building of the Rockefeller Center in New York City, New York in 1928, and by the time the center opened in 1931, the workers erect a Christmas tree in the middle of the construction site. This event was so popular among the workers and locals that Rockefeller Sr. decided to make it into a tradition. He traveled to Babylon to look for the most magnificent tree for the next Christmas, searching for 12 days and 12 nights. After an extensive search, he hears music in the air that sounded like the very wind itself had fallen in love. He followed the tune until he and his crew came across an all too familiar character to us, a special tree. The team attempted to chop the tree down to no avail, attempting the next day to extract it using 100 sticks of dynamite. When that also failed, a team of gravediggers was hired to dig the tree out. The gravediggers attempt this task for 1 week, discovering their efforts would inevitably take 3 years to complete. Begrudgingly, Rockefeller Sr. agrees and selects 3 trees for the next 3 years, finally bringing the special tree to the center by December 1934. The tree was raised in Midtown Manhattan, and since the tree was bare and had no branches, Mayor Guardia requested that some branches be glued to hang ornaments. Rockefeller Sr. initially protests, but eventually acquiesces and his workers glue the branches on. A young girl, Virginia Arnoldson, arrives to place a star ornament on the tree that she'd bought with 9 months' worth of allowance money she'd saved up. She wanted to be the first person to decorate this new tree and enlisted the help of 10 friends to help her reach the lowest branch to do so. Her friends stood on top of each other's shoulders with Virginia at the top, allowing her to place the ornament at the very top of the tree. As soon as the star was placed, the tree bent backwards and created a portal to Wonderland, sucking the 11 children inside. When Virginia woke up, she found herself in a field of special trees. I'll let Virginia describe Wonderland in her own words.
When my eyes adjusted, I was in a field of special trees. I was reminded of a story my ma told me. Alice in Wonderland. This is my Wonderland. I held myself close and looked up. The trees looked like they ended, but above them there were upside-down trees, and above those there were upright trees, like they were being reflected forever. The pattern repeated for as far as I could see. I looked down, and I thought I was on solid ground. But when I looked more closely, I was sitting on a thin, floating layer of dust. It smelled like baby powder. And through the dust, I could see the start of another tree. And below that one, there was another, and another, an infinity of trees.
As she sat in Wonderland, baffled by what she saw, the trees would emit flashes of light repeatedly like in the Rockefeller Center. People would run into the endless abyss around her as the flashes went off until she eventually was approached by a man with sad, tired eyes that told her the trees are not the trees. He would take her into his charge and say, "You could be her, anyone could be her, but I promise I will not leave you." She named this man her only friend and her protector, Everett. Put a pin in that, as this is going to be very, very important later. The two spend what feels like forever together, dealing with the flashes of light, teleporting them through time and space across the different levels of Wonderland. All the while, she describes creatures called the Climbers all around them.
But we would always see the climbers. I think there were people who tried to climb the trees while they were flashed around. They were stretched and burnt.
Sound familiar? After going through what felt like 500 years in Wonderland, she randomly pops back into reality, but not the one she came from. The Virginia and the Monument Mythos videos, I believe, is from the alternate version of our reality and was swapped with the Monument Mythos reality's version of her. Everett was not with her when she was in this Twilight Zone version of a place she knew and at the same time didn't even recognize. The special tree was also gone. Virginia and her friends were taken by medical personnel to be evaluated at the Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, finding that they were different in ways I can only think she would describe properly.
My Ma and Pa visited me at the hospital, but they looked completely different. Ma looked worried. After she wiped her tears, she asked, "Did you hang your bear at the Rockefeller tree?" I answered, "It wasn't a bear. I was going to hang a star." To which they asked, "What do you mean?" Pa asked, "Where did you get these clothes?" I answered, "These are my clothes, the ones you helped me put on this morning." To which they asked, "What do you mean?" My ma then asked, "Why are there dots all over your face?" I answered, "Those are my freckles. I've had them since I was little." To which they asked, "What do you mean?" My parents quietly left my bed and talked to my friend's parents. Then they all started to cry and yell. The nurses made them leave, which made me feel better. None of us thought that our real parents had visited. They all did feel familiar. Orville and Philip were especially shaken. They didn't even share the same last name with their parents. The nurses tried to convince us that those who had visited us were our parents, and that we would come around to properly greet them after we healed. But it was hard to believe. Whenever I looked out the window...
After the irate parents of the 11 children were taken away, they were visited by Rockefeller Sr. Simple history questions were asked, and at first, the answers the children gave made him chuckle. But that quickly changed when Virginia mentioned how she knew him. With each question he asked, the answers made him increasingly more inconsolable until he had to excuse himself.
But of all the discrepancies, the most bizarre was their faulty recollections of notable persons and events. For instance, each of the affected children claimed that I had become the wealthiest man in America through an oil monopoly. It is common knowledge that I did indeed work at an oil refinery in my youth, but to entirely deny my 2 terms as president and insist instead that I had always been a mere philanthropist struck me as being particularly odd. The families were agonized by the children's behavior. Some continue to search for their real children. I support their endeavors, for I do not believe that the children's afflictions were the result of hysteria.
Once he left, the children were given x-rays to make sure no bones had been fractured from their fall, but the results showed that everything's backwards. Virginia only knew of this because she was unable to sleep and eavesdropped on the nurses speaking to each other about it. The workers at the plaza who started the Christmas tree tradition were publicly blamed for the tragedy, but Rockefeller Sr. knew he was truly to blame.
For the last 2 years, I have seldom mentioned the tragedy that occurred at the center. Many have taken offense at my silence, claiming it to be the result of a desensitization to workplace accidents. Indeed, I have seen enough accidents in 3 lifetimes, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened at the center. For some time now, my friends have blamed the center's original construction workers for the tragedy, since it was their very own Christmas tree that had started the whole tradition. But the truth is that their tree brought joy and wonder to the public. It was my tree, and my tree alone, that brought about the unprecedented loss.
The parents did eventually take custody of their children, even though they believed that those children were merely doppelgangers.
I visited them as soon as I had the chance to. All the families of these children were deeply unsettled, for they had all independently come to the conclusion their child had been replaced by a doppelganger. They claimed that these new sons and daughters possessed substantial differences from their real children. The majority of differences involved altered physical attributes and the inability to recognize familiar locations and characters, such as their parents and their homes.
The bitterness that resulted from this event caused many of the children to be abandoned at an orphanage, including Virginia. Therefore, the event was dubbed the Rockefeller Tragedy. Those children, by Rockefeller Sr.'s own words, were forever altered by the event that occurred with the special tree.
It is only natural for the reader at this point to wonder why the incident has been referred to as a tragedy. There had been no loss of life, and, aside from a few temporary scorch marks on the center, no damage to the surrounding property. I, too, assumed it was a mostly inconsequential event, likely an electrical accident whose effects were exaggerated by the children at the scene. I was grateful that every life involved had been spared. A death at the center would have weighed heavily on my mind for some time, but when I encountered the results of the children's medical examinations, I wished that a death had occurred in place of the unfathomable.
Not long after the tragedy, the tapes of Rockefeller Sr. confessing to his part in the creation of the Rockefellers and all surrounding events were leaked to the public.
Every day, I find myself recollecting the day that I had selected the tree. I have since realized the difficulties involved in the removal of it should have repeatedly discouraged me, and had I been discouraged, the families of those children would not be experiencing the anguish that they currently have. Perhaps I never had the opportunity to select another tree. Perhaps I was meant to select that tree regardless of my persistent character. Perhaps we are all trolleys, forced to follow the path of the track to each of our destinations. I take solace in that thought. Or perhaps the tree chose me. It is a miracle that only now the news of my involvement in the Great War has become widely known. Thankfully, information on the crowns has continued to stay hidden from the public spotlight. I would much rather have the public believe that Germans were the only persons inside when the airships were shot down and crashed in flames. With the tragedy at the center, and now the airship scandal, known by many as the Rockefeller Revelation, I believe that my failures finally caught up to me. There are men outside the center who had once been my supporters. Now they want me executed. The policemen have kept the crowds at bay, though I believe that my assassination is, like the revelation, inevitable. To be elected the president of a country is the greatest honor a people can bestow, but at the moment I do wish to be the famous oil tycoon that young Virginia Arnoldson believed I was. Forgive me.
On May 23, 1937, Rockefeller Sr. entered a bunker under 30 Rockefeller Plaza and goes missing. The door to the bunker had been melted open, and investigators described the damage to have been done by possibly the most powerful heat ray ever built. 2 photos of the potential suspect were eventually released, showing the visage of a massive creature, the same creature created by the destruction of the L-70. The Rockefeller Foundation believes he was just abducted, but I and many others who have watched this series believe he was murdered. In 1939, Virginia Arnoldson turns 18, leaves the orphanage to start her new life as an adult, and decides to visit her parents from the Monument Mythos reality. She discovers that in the time since her being abandoned, her father had died of a broken heart and her mother suffered from crippling paranoia. Not knowing what to do or where to turn, she goes to the Rockefeller Center and looked up to see the special tree standing atop it. She speaks to the tree and initially doesn't understand it and refers to it as a woman, as if it were a human, but eventually she can understand what it's saying. She is told that she must return in 3 years' time and be ready to exchange one life for my own to return to the reality from which she came. It's been brought to my attention that there's a theory floating around out there that this is actually a 9-year gap instead of 3 because this particular scene repeats twice more, but I can't find anything really concrete for that, so I'm not going to use that in this timeline. I also want to note that the tree has taken on a more humanoid appearance from the drawings provided by Virginia. During the 3 years of waiting, Virginia realizes she's being followed by a man she calls a secret agent and very important. One night, she arrived home to find he had broken in. He said that while watching her, he'd fallen in love with her and wanted her to know that he was there to protect her. After this, the two got close and would fall in love. Who is this mystery man? Well, none other than Leonard W. Moreland himself. The two become a wedded couple and Virginia becomes pregnant sometime in 1941 or 1942 with a son. Virginia would name this unborn child Everett. In 1942, while 9 months pregnant, Virginia returned to the Rockefeller Center to meet with the tree. She's telepathically given directions to the Washington Monument and heads there on foot, taking 4 days to arrive at her destination. I'll allow her to describe what happened when she got there.
But I became so happy when I could hear the music. It was like the tree's voice, but warm. The Washington Monument looked much bigger in person. Its door went up high, like it was for something much bigger. Then I went inside. There were bodies everywhere. The breeze told me to relax. I went on the elevator. It went up, all the way up. It stopped at the top, and the music blared. It was so loud I could not move. The floor opened, and I fell all the way down. I felt myself hit the ground. Then I kept drifting down, past the ground, past rock, sand, and magma, through the layers of earth. It must have been years. It felt like 500 years.
Through means unknown, per Leonard W. Moreland's testimony, American officials discovered that Giza glass can cause harm to the special trees in 1945. The US government does discover how to destroy special trees through the Trinity Project that same year, using the atomic bomb. This bit of information comes from the newer Q&As from Alex Casanas, aka Mr. Manticore. This event is one I'm not totally sure about when it comes to specific dates, but I surmise that this occurred between March 12, 1947 and December 26, 1991. The US president and military classify the Great Pyramids of Giza as true forces of mass destruction, or TFMDs, and request the ability to excavate them from the Egyptian government. Like you would expect, the Egyptians protested and insisted that their method for taming the trees, their version of the Giza Guardians, would keep their people safe. Because the United Nations had deemed TFMDs as the single most dangerous threat to humanity, the US went behind the backs of Egyptian officials and conducted the excavation anyways. During the first week of the excavation, it was discovered that the pyramids themselves were merely the tip of the structure they came from. By the third week, the excavation team discovered that they were dealing with an iceberg with infinite layers meant to contain the special trees. And of course, this was not disclosed to the public. In 1949, the Statue of Liberty goes under renovations under classified blueprint ST-LI 1.8084. The Ellis Island immigration station is also opened and immigrants to the US start to disappear. In 1950, US government officials discover that Alcatraz Island is a TFMD and is afflicted with a disease called Alcatrazosis. The island is literally a giant living, multiplying cell and is multiplying to copy all living things it came in contact with. They decided that the only way to treat this is a massive dose of radiation. And like everything else in this timeline, this plan backfires, and one day after the treatment, the island is multiplying at an even more rapid pace. It was projected that by 2005, Alcatrazosis would reach mainland USA. In the summer of 1954, immigrants complained about the smell emanating from Ellis Island. One immigrant from the time, Eleonora Bramante, gives an interview regarding the experience.
Ellis Island era orribile. L'intero posto puzzava di carne, come un mattatoio. C'erano anche uccelli morti ovunque, e mia sorella ne trovò persino uno nel gabinetto. Se già la costa è così, diceva mio padre, immaginate quanto puzzeranno le città. Ricordo di aver sentito altre famiglie dire quasi scherzosamente che volessero tornare a Milano per via dell'odore. La mia famiglia aveva spruzzato profumo e acceso candele per tenere lontano il fetore, ma funzionava solo per un'ora o giù di lì, finché l'aria diventava di nuovo insopportabile. Le serate erano così calde. Rimasi per lo più sveglia, anche se il resto della mia famiglia dormiva profondamente. Ricordo che guardavo fuori dalla finestra ogni notte e vedevo file di persone che venivano condotte alla Statua della Libertà dai funzionari. Se solo fossero saliti sul piedistallo, i funzionari se ne sarebbero andati e non sarebbe successo nient'altro. La mattina seguente però ci sarebbe stato un odore peggiore, come un mattatoio.
By November 1954, the immigration station closed its doors for good. James Dean does not die from a car accident occurring September 30th, 1955. The accident isn't really mentioned in any of the Monument Mythos content or Q&As, so I can't really say whether or not it even happened to begin with. I'm just gonna assume it never happened due to some of the later events in the timeline. And that's it for part 1, everyone. We're halfway through the timeline, and trust me when I tell you, it gets even more complicated and horrifying from here. Stay tuned for part 2 of the Monument Mythos timeline coverage, and as always, sweet nightmares. I wanted to take this time to thank my Patreons and channel members. Your support is so greatly appreciated, and I can't thank you enough. If you'd like to become a Patreon, there is a link in the description below, and if you'd like to become a channel member, just go ahead and click that join button and join the Truth Sleuths and Horror Hounds. All channel members and Patreons receive 24-hour access to videos prior to their public release and exclusive updates on my progress. After a certain tier, you can request that I do a certain topic or movie review, or you can even request that I do a game live stream, whichever works for you. At the highest tier, you not only get to choose the topic in which I cover, you get to either co-host the stream or the video that I do that covers said topic, no matter if it's one or multiple. Of course, this is not obligatory. If you want to support the channel, I greatly appreciate it, and once again, thank you so much.